rest either exist or just suck. The show has run into a problem where they hyperfixate on a small idea that can't carry itself for an entire episode, thus making the plots thinner, the actual jokes more dated, and everything else feels like it was either an afterthought or something that they really wanted to be the actual focal point. Nothing has moved forward, so why should we stay invested in a story you clearly want people to be invested in if you aren't going to care? It always has to be meta, self-referential, unexpected in the worst possible ways. Guys, I have bad news. They made an episode of Rick and Morty that doesn't feature Rick. Society will never recover from this. It's likely that this was a meta joke about the death of Justin Roiland's career. Another year, another Rick and Morty season. I know I said it at the start of the last video, but it really says a lot about how new seasons of Rick and Morty used to be seen as these massive events before season 5. No doubt assisted by the series frequently going on hiatus before the world ended, but I think a combination of the show finally getting a yearly release schedule and the perceived drop in quality by many of its fans have led to the series losing a lot of its impact in pop culture. The same cannot be said for the outside controversies that plagued season 7 before it released. If you've been following this channel over the last nearly 2 years, what happened, you'd know that I, along with a lot of other fans of Rick and Morty, have been incredibly disappointed with many of the show's recent seasons. Ever since season 4, it felt like the show was in a constant cycle of self-loathing, trashing any form of serialized storytelling in order to be painfully meta and poking fun at the fans who cared about it, despite also having at least one obligatory story episode per season upon realizing people might stop watching the show if they keep belittling the audience's intelligence. The show also over-relying on meta-jokes and reference humor led to episodes that had very few genuine laughs, and the overall writing quality took a pretty substantial hit. And to say the writers themselves were also aware of this was...
When you get home, Rick, do some classic adventures, like season 1. I'm so sick of that no, what the does it even mean?
Putting it lightly. Season 6 was where I completely lost my patience with the show, but also lost a lot of my interest. I had completely mixed thoughts on season 6 because each episode felt like a mix of the show's best and worst qualities blended together into sludge, all the while constantly crying for help and venting the writer's frustrations into an episode script dedicated entirely to pissing on pretty much every critique people have levied against the show for a while now. Because the first attempt went so well, it was very upsetting to see the show in this state. It was boring, completely unfunny, and while it showed genuinely brilliant aspects of the Rick and Morty I once fell in love with years ago, it was plagued by the show constantly tripping over itself with the same tired writing problems, and while there were 2 episodes I can say were genuinely good, nothing about the season stood out whatsoever, besides the temper tantrum episode. It felt very much like the show had fallen into a slump. Season 6 gave me a lot of mixed feelings because the quality of nearly every episode was incredibly inconsistent, and to say the show didn't feel the same was underselling the issue. I know a lot of people are still diehard defenders of this show, and that's fine, but no normal show has episodes where the writers just blatantly vent their frustrations onto a script. Twice. Expectations for season 7 were higher than I expected given 6 was a marginal improvement over 5, but I truly believed that the show was going to be caught in a weird limbo where I was going to forever be mixed on it. And now that we have season 7, I can officially say that I was completely correct. And incredibly wrong. I wouldn't just make another Rick and Morty video if the next season was mid or even god-awful. I would only give the show another review if they finally did something interesting. And I think they did it. I'm mixed on season 7, I think a lot of people are, Jesus Christ, but not in the same way I was for 6. Whereas 6 was mixed because there was an equal amount yet sporadic balance of pros and cons in nearly every episode. 7 is mixed because it's not only filled with some of the best episodes the show has ever produced, but some of the most offensively awful garbage I have watched all year. There is no in-between. Either an episode in season 7 is good to great, or complete hot f***ing garbage that I wouldn't allow to be 20 meters away from my family. And I am incredibly thankful for this. Because while the bad episodes are absolutely just the worst of the worst, just Rick and Morty at its most creatively bankrupt, they gave Ice-T an entire episode. The good episodes this season are some of the most entertaining, engaging, and most importantly, sincere episodes of the show since season 3. Wars have been started over less controversial statements, I do realize, but I am not joking when I say that the good episodes have plenty of well-timed, actually funny jokes that don't rely on referencing stuff or being meta, actually care about its story and characters, and while there are a few parts where it's recycling some previous ideas, I can't shake the thought that the show is finally trying again. It obviously still has a lot to prove next season considering how 50% of season 7 is still hot garbage, but there's a level of sincerity to Rick and Morty now that hasn't been felt in years. It's no longer undercutting its serious moments for a cheap meta joke or bad improv, it's exploring its characters in ways that are both funny and genuinely intriguing, and it's finally striking a decent balance of keeping a serialized plot in the background while having the episodic fun it clearly wants, while still delivering on the eventual story-focused episodes. I really want to get into this now, but first I think we need to discuss what I'm sure you're all thinking about right now. Thanks for adding an extra page to my script, Roiland, you talentless schmuck. Alright, let's get it out of the way. Justin Roiland! Welcome back, Justin. Not to your show, anyway. A surprising number of people got really mad and upset at all of the Justin Roiland jokes I made in my last Rick and Morty video when the news of him being a degenerate and alleged abuser came out. I'll admit I didn't know if he was actually innocent or not. I just saw a bunch of easy jokes that thousands of people have made before me and just went for the jugular on all of them. But obviously the entire incident led to Roiland being fired by Adult Swim, which not only meant Rick and Morty lost its co-creator, but also lost its main voice actor, the guy who voices like 70% of the cast in each episode on top of Rick and Morty themselves. Fast forward to today and you're gonna find a shocking number of people who like to say that Roiland was completely 100% innocent and that he was proven innocent in a court of law with all of his charges cleared, and that him being fired from Adult Swim is a sign that he's guilty until proven innocent and that he's being cancelled by the woke mob. Okay, wait, that doesn't sound... Well, I'd like to say I'm surprised, but what a lot of these people failed to tell you is that Justin Roiland was not proven innocent, nor was he proven guilty. His case was officially dropped due to there not being enough sufficient evidence, which could mean a lot of things. And while I know there are plenty of people out there who will gladly take that as a win, I know Justin did. Justice, I hate this guy. We haven't seen any evidence from Roiland or the accuser to actually draw a proper conclusion on that. But whatever, right? If this was the only thing that happened, then perhaps Roiland would still be on the show, and would still have people's respect. Well, there's a convenient thing people tend to leave out when discussing Roiland being cancelled and vilified. They only bring up a court case that got dropped, and not these several creepy and unhinged Twitter DMs and text messages that Roiland had been sending to young fans of the show that have not been proven to be faked, along with a slew of other details that'll likely get this video taken down. I'm only bringing this up because I truly do believe that Roiland is a f***ing creep and a talentless one at that, and I felt like making it clear that Roiland has several shady things going on, and seeing people just blindly throwing themselves at him to defend his honor because they think he's being cancelled shows just how depraved the culture wars have become, and also how absolutely insane and pathetic this show's fanbase is. Onto a lighter topic, Rick and Morty needed new voice actors. There was a lot of contention here as well, seeing as a lot of the show's charm came from Roiland's chemistry with himself, voicing both of the protagonists as well as a majority of the side characters. The way he'd bounce off himself and the way he'd improvise dialogue were undeniably a part of the show's charm. With Roiland gone from that position, because let's be honest, he did f*** all anywhere else, what was gonna happen? How would the replacement sound? Would the show lose a part of itself? I'd like to offer a counterpoint. Justin Roiland is not a good voice actor. He is an okay one, but he uses the exact same annoying and squeaky voice for like every character he's played that isn't Rick. And this isn't limited to Rick and Morty. Check any show he's ever cameoed in. Gravity Falls, Adventure Time. There are very rare exceptions where he isn't playing a character whose only personality trait is having an annoying voice. Granted, he plays Rick and Morty well enough, but there are many points where you can feel his dismal vocal range restraining him, stopping him from letting these characters experience a wider range of emotions. Sure, his voices for them were iconic, and they're going to be popular party tricks for white teenagers for the next few decades, but very rarely does Roiland ever get to show he can voice act beyond doing a funny voice and screaming. Still, most people are very attached to Roiland's voice, and finding any replacement for him, regardless of how good they were, would prove to be a difficult task, and fans would definitely take a while to adjust to the change. Then we got the first trailer for season 7, and... wait, these are new voice actors? I mean, yeah, if you listen close enough, you can hear that they aren't exactly the same as Roiland, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that the voices were mostly on point, and I think most people were as well. You had some people trying to claim they sounded nothing like Roiland at all. These people are traps devised by Satan for the purpose of grifting. From what I could hear, there was nothing wrong with the new voices besides some very minor differences if you listen closely enough. What people wanted to know, however, was if these new VAs would have the same chemistry together that Roiland did, and would they keep the feel of the show intact. So we have Ian Cardoni as Rick and Harry Belden as Morty. And now that we've been through the entire season, I can say with certainty that I honestly prefer these guys over Roiland. Yet no man, while they don't possess the same chemistry Roiland had and there's far less improv dialogue, we've been given far better and more expressive delivery when it comes to jokes as well as more serious scenes. Roiland's voice was consistent to a fault. His vocal range stopped him from going all out in the voices of these characters. In episode 5 of season 7, Ian Cardoni manages to deliver a scene with so much genuine anger and emotion that Roiland only wishes he could do. He is a fantastic voice actor, and I'm just gonna say it, I could never imagine Roiland pulling off a scene like this. Rick's screams feel so much more naturally angry and less phoned in. Meanwhile, Rick Prime's voice is slowly getting more garbled and pained as Rick beats him to a pulp. You can audibly hear him struggling to get his words out through his bruises, blood, and destroyed skin as his laughter turns to weeping.
You lived in my house!
It's a genuinely amazing performance, and you gotta realize that being told to do a scene like this only 5 episodes into your first season as his beloved and recognizable character had to have been tough. And even outside of this scene, Rick's line reads are just so much better and more expressive. Obviously, when Cardone screams like Roiland does, you can hear his voice wavering a bit, but other than that, he does an incredibly good job as Rick. Harry Belden is also fantastic as Morty, and I genuinely could not tell a single thing about Morty was off. He is pitch perfect while, again, having substantially better line reads. This is probably an incredibly divisive take, given people were fuming at the idea of Roiland being replaced in the first place, and admittedly it does take a few episodes for Ian and Harry to hone their voices to perfection, but these guys have completely blown my expectations out of the water here, and I can't wait to see them keep improving for the next season. With this all out of the way now, we can finally actually talk about season 7, so we'll start with the bad and then go on to the good.
This is your path to be.
Even though I made my case earlier and said that it feels like Rick and Morty is finally finding its footing again, I still have reason to believe that this season is suffering from a severe identity crisis. While the good episodes end up being some of the best in years, the bad episodes feel so far removed from what the show was supposed to be like. Even previous bad episodes of the show still felt like they belonged in some way and still felt like episodes of Rick and Morty. But here something definitely feels off, to the point where one of these episodes probably took the crown of the worst episode of the entire show. Yes, worse than the episode about Morty's sperm, by completely missing the core concept the show is built around and just straight up not featuring any mention of Rick whatsoever. I'm not sure if I emphasized it enough, but Jesus Christ, the bad episodes of this season really are some of the absolute worst in the entire show. I will give them some credit, there are very few examples I can give for the show abusing meta-humor and reference jokes. In fact, I think there's less of them here than in season 1, and the jokes themselves aren't really the main problem with these episodes. If anything, they were some of the saving graces. There were a handful of funny moments in them, which is more than I can say for season 6, which was so lacking in any real entertainment value it might as well be called a dentist appointment show. The problem is that while I am happy the show seems to be treating continuity much more seriously than it used to, season 7 gets a little too comfortable with recycling ideas and then sometimes just throwing out potentially interesting and creative ideas for something substantially worse. The first episode of the season legitimately feels like it was ripped straight out of Family Guy, and it's not a good episode of Family Guy either. Having an episode with Rick and his close friends trying to help PB is a fantastic concept, but it goes south very quickly with the random guest appearance of Hugh Jackman proceeding to Hugh Jack the episode. This feels like a much more grounded story you'd find in a sitcom show, hence the Family Guy comparison. And while usually Rick and Morty would find some way to shake it up, they just don't do that here. It really doesn't feel like it belongs in this show. There's a reason why the season 6 premiere is one of the lowest rated episodes on IMDb, besides people baby raging about the voice actors being different. And it's because it doesn't feel like Rick and Morty at all. It doesn't even have a potentially interesting B-plot. In fact, none of the episodes this season have a B-plot except for the last one, and even then it can be argued that it's technically part of the A-plot. And even when an episode does feel like it belongs, somewhat, there's still problems with episodes throwing out more interesting stories for something blander. Bringing Unity back, for example, is legitimately interesting, and given how their last appearance was in season 2 and resulted in one of the best episodes in the entire show and one of the most heartbreaking moments, there's a goldmine of opportunities here that you'd have to be insane not to explore. But instead they opt for an episode where they throw in the President and Dr. Wong into the mix, place barely any focus on the actual conflict between Rick and Unity, keep having the President make the predictable choice of being a duplicitous dickhead that we've seen multiple times in the past now, and ending the episode with a moment that's supposed to make us feel bad for Rick and for us to feel his sorrow now that he has proper closure with Unity, though not the closure he wanted. But because the plot leading up to this moment was so cluttered and messy, it completely fails to hit as hard as it wants to. While it's obviously not as heavy as season 2 episode 3 where Rick attempted to kill himself, this scene could have still packed an emotional punch if it earned the build up, and it just doesn't. Episode 7 starts out like a Rick and Morty episode you'd find in the first 2 seasons, with Summer and Morty fighting over a device that changes aspects of yourself like stats in an RPG. With the return to Summer and Morty in their high school lives, this could have been a brilliant setup for an episode, and the first couple of minutes show how much potential the idea has for comedy and intrigue, but then they get meta and make fun of anyone who would possibly want to see that sort of idea. Summer and Morty both fall into a pool, device malfunctions, and then wow, what a neat phrase. I can't wait to see this on a shirt in Hot Topic next month. The whole Quato thing is bizarrely unfunny, and the story is somehow super dry and boring. It drags its feet the moment they abandoned the stat slider concept, and I don't understand why they threw out this idea when it had so much more potential to be interesting than whatever this episode was trying to say. Like, I don't really get what this was or what its point is. It was just weird for the sake of being weird, and it really started to get on my nerves towards the end as Rick and Summer just sit there and watch this tiny cretin and only decide to take action when this just 2 minutes of the episode left, and they still keep milking the joke for an extra 30 seconds. Like, what was this episode exactly? And don't get me started on episode 8. Choosing to take a post-credits joke from the end of Get Swifty in season 2 and creating an entire episode about it. It's just puns. The entire episode is just lame alphabet and math puns while they make a parody of Star Wars, which, wow, I've never seen that before, especially not in Rick and Morty. It's complete and total sh**. It's the worst episode of the whole show. The pacing is a mile a minute, yet it still feels like it takes hours before it ends. And it commits a brand new cardinal sin that should literally be in the show's Bible. No Rick. The whole show is built on Rick and Morty's dynamic. Morty is here, but he's a background character observing the action. He has literally no reason to be here. And the complete absence of Rick highlights how out of place and creatively bankrupt the episode is. This is Rick and Morty on autopilot. Even when an episode has a great concept and decides to go all in with it, like episode 9, they manage to fumble the bag somehow. Rick discovers that some kind of afterlife does exist and attempts to specifically get into Valhalla by dying in a fierce battle in Norway, just so he can leech this afterlife for unlimited energy. This is a great concept for an episode and absolutely something Rick would go out of his way to attempt. The first half of this episode is very entertaining, but then they get ahead of themselves by giving this episode an obligatory antagonist, and the conclusion drags its feet once again by milking a joke dry for several minutes. It's hard to nail down a specific problem with the writing of season 7's bad episodes. There's just something insanely off about how they're paced and how they flesh out their concepts. It feels like an attempt to capture the spark of Rick and Morty, but being held back by something. I'm not exaggerating when I say the good episodes of season 7 are the most I've enjoyed Rick and Morty in years. To me, it feels like it's matching the quality of the best season 3 episodes. Definitely not on the same level as the best episode of the series to this date, the Ricklanthus mix-up, but this is the best the show has felt in a long time, and it's thanks to one key ingredient that's been missing for a while. Sincerity. As Rick and Morty went on, it got swept up in the hype of being meta, fourth wall breaking, and painfully self-aware to the point where you could really tell they did not care about anything they were writing, and were undercutting a majority of their big reveals in an effort to curb stomp the idea of being a serialized story. It was a knee-jerk reaction to criticism of season 3, where the show attempted being almost fully serialized and bit off a bit more than they could chew, and it's definitely what makes the show's later seasons so divisive, because we can feel that they don't care about giving us those special moments of sincerity, along with an entertaining premise and execution that the first 2 seasons had in spades. Season 7's good episodes don't feel like they're constantly taking the audience for a ride and keeping everyone guessing on whether or not they should care about what they're seeing. There's no problem with being subversive or unexpected. Heck, they still managed to be unexpected this season in ways that are pleasantly surprising, but constantly trying to pull the rug out from under the viewers ironically got super predictable, especially when half the time it was done for an incredibly lame joke. I've said it a few times, but I'm pretty impressed with the comedy writing of this season overall, being far less reliant on meta jokes than finally writing actual situational comedy and ways for the characters to bounce off each other. Small gags like Morty lying about bringing Rick coffee because he knows he's not going to be grateful for it are much more appreciated than him entering a room and making a self-aware observation about Rick's obsession with finding Rick Prime. And it's also completely in character now that Morty is wise to all of his tricks and mannerisms. Rick casually tossing Jerry a gun without saying a word in response to him having suspicions about his neighbor, Wong immediately calling out Rick for being a hologram during therapy, Rick sticking a drawing of his future death on the sentient fridge, which gets even funnier when you see it actually happens in episode 9, and there's a distinct lack of improv, likely because Roiland's gone, but I also see this as a bonus. Roiland's improv, while an iconic part of the show, had gotten fairly stale by season 5. Seeing the show having to make actual jokes again is a good thing, honestly. Episode 6 is a case of the show recycling ideas again. This is basically just Morty's mind blowers but with a different premise, which was already interdimensional cable but with a different premise. But a lot of the skits are genuinely hilarious. The entire gun skit with Rick handing Morty different guns and being misleading about what they actually do was the hardest I have laughed at a moment of the show since season 2. It's so bizarre but so relieving to finally see the show utilize the rule of 3 to write a comedy skit. It just keeps hitting you with escalations and then finishing off with the f***ing Jeffrey Dahmer gun. While I don't want the show to recycle episode ideas, Rick and Jerry having a personal adventure together was done better in season 3, I don't mind if they still manage to make a fun episode out of it that has something to say about the characters, even if it's been said before. I enjoyed seeing a brain swap episode completely shake up what it means to brain swap, melting different parts of Rick and Jerry's minds together into 2 beings that aren't either Rick or Jerry, yet retain specific parts of their personalities. Even beyond this, the show has finally found a way to retain its darker, nihilistic shock humor without completely going in on nihilism in general, and making it its whole identity. Episode 4 is literally an episode about people killing themselves and telling a dark and comically f***ed up story about its exploitation using a dimension where people who take their own lives turn into fucking spaghetti. It's shock humor, but it's completely tasteful, not like that last pun, what am I doing? And still treats the subject matter with respect while properly critiquing the ethics of both capitalism and consumerism. I just wrote that sentence about a Rick and Morty episode. I'm going to bed after this. I know Rick and Morty have done the show someone's life crumbling to pieces with sad music bits a few times now, but this was still a pretty heavy scene and rounded out the episode fairly well. This is the kind of stuff I would have actually expected from seasons 1 and 2. None of that, oh, it's just the fact it's episodic like it really feels like something they would have probably been too scared to make an episode out of now. It takes balls to tell a story about something this sensitive and still making it shockingly poignant. This is the kind of sharp and smart writing the show used to have that inspired all of those cringe Reddit arguments about Rick and Morty being for intelligent people. Episode 5 is just a fantastic episode through and through, and a great example of how the show should be subverting people's expectations. Evil Morty's return came out of nowhere but makes sense. Rick Prime being dealt with in this episode is a shock, but still leaves a narrative to be told about what Rick's purpose is now that he's finally gotten revenge on the men who took everything from him. And there's no self-deprecation or jokes about this being an obligatory story episode. It's played completely straight while having natural comedy and never taking away from the drama. And if we want to talk about the highlights of this season, nay the entire show, episode 10 is one of the greatest episodes the show has ever had. I really can't do a proper analysis of it, and I'm sure many will do that for me, but this is a perfect blend of comedy and horror and a devilishly good character study of Morty and his fears of relying on Rick, exploring the psychology of their relationship and laying the groundwork for future conflicts that they'll both have to deal with. It's powerfully done and treats the characters with a lot of respect. Small gestures like Rick running back in at the end to put Morty's photo on the wall of people who entered the fear hole goes a long way to show how much he actually cares for him. Heck, him realizing how much the hole screwed with Morty and taking his advice to not jump down it shows that just as much. The good qualities of season 7 really show the return of Rick and Morty's soul that has been lacking for years now. While it's still being held back by a ton of previous problems and botched experimentation, you can really feel that the people behind Rick and Morty care and want to return to the quality that made the show famous in the first place. I don't have much else to add because I'm running out of time here, but I was pleasantly surprised by season 7. It's definitely an insane roller coaster of quality, but when it hits, it really hits. And I wish we could have every episode be at a consistently good quality again. I hope season 8 at least gets closer to that, and if it does, I may be more secure in calling myself a fan of the show again. For now though, Rick and Morty is suffering from an identity crisis, and I just hope that next time it'll realize what it wants to be and stick with it. That's the end of the video. Play Yakuza or something, I don't know.